when they all went back to Medina after Uhud, everybody in Medina had a deceased person from Uhud, right? Everyone had a relative that was killed in Uhud in some way. So everyone in Medina was crying, and there was a particular thing called the niyaha, which was the wailing ceremonies, the mourning that the women would do in particular in Medina, mourning over the deceased. And the Prophet ﷺ was walking the streets of Medina, and he sees the crying and the wailing of the women in Medina, and the men as well, in their niyaha, in their grief over what has happened. And the Prophet ﷺ, he puts his head down and he says, "Tabkuna qatlakum." You cry over your dead ones. He said, "Ammi Hamza, my uncle, la bawakiya lahu." There's no one to cry over him. Like, subhanAllah, his sadness, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All these families in Medina are gathered and they're all crying over their deceased ones. He said, but my uncle Hamza, who the Prophet ﷺ cried more for than anyone that they'd ever seen, right? The way he cried over Hamza was the deep cry. They said the weeping of the Prophet ﷺ when Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu was massacred, when he was murdered that way. So he said, Hamza has no one to cry over him. So what did they do in Medina? They went all around the Prophet ﷺ's house and they started to loudly wail out of their love for the Prophet ﷺ. SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. Like, think about their love for the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like subhanAllah, we ignored him while we were crying over our own. We forgot that he lost his uncle in this battle, and he doesn't have his family with him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, it's different. And so they all went in front of the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they started to cry and mourn and weep. And this is when the hukum, the ruling of an-niyaha, the prohibition of mourning, wailing out loud, came down only after the death of Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Wailing is to shout, to cry loudly at the death of a person. So Hamza radiallahu anhu was the last person that this would be allowed for.